All right, as I've been doing more and more of the TV circuit on CNN and some other outlets, a while back I got to do a political panel with our guest that's here. And, at the time, he was a TV pundit. He was an author. He was a historian. His wife has a great show on PBS. So the man was all throughout TV punditry, making his platform known and making political arguments. And then one day out of the blue, I find out he's running for Congress. And I'm like, what? Where? How? So we have him on the show here. My buddy John Avlon is joining us, author, historian, and now running for the congressional seat over in New York's 1st District up in Suffolk County. John, Mike, and Nick, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast with us.
Hey, man, my great pleasure. Good to see you.
Likewise, good to see you. So, let's start at a 30,000 foot overview. Maybe some of our listeners, let's say they don't watch CNN, okay? Let's say they don't know Margaret, they don't watch PBS, right? They haven't read any of your books about Lincoln and some of the great historical work. They didn't even know you were a speechwriter for Once Upon a Time, America's Mayor and Rudy Giuliani. So let's tell them at a 30,000 foot overview, John, why did you leave the television punditry world where you could make a dent and an impact like you were doing, and why run for Congress in New York?
Because I didn't think it was doing enough. And look, I get the joke, man, right? I mean, everyone in Congress seems like they want to be on TV. We got to do nothing Congress, and they say they'd rather be on TV. And so people aren't used to people leaving TV to enter public service. But that's just what I felt the times called for in my own life. I didn't think that offering opinions on cable news panels was enough. I've loved being a journalist for 20 years. I've been editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast, written thousands of columns at my reality check segment on CNN, did the morning show almost every day for close to 10 years. And I love my former colleagues at CNN. But this, I think, is one of those elections where our nation's on a knife edge. And if we get this right, we'll be fine. If we get this wrong, God help us. And I didn't want to look at my kids and say I could have done more when it mattered most. I'm the grandson of immigrants. And like a lot of immigrant families, we grew up pretty patriotic. You don't take America for granted. And the idea that we could see it run down on our watch, totally unacceptable to me. And so I think now's the time to sort of roll up your sleeves and do the hard thing and maybe the rare thing, but run for office because that's what democracy requires sometimes, just citizens step up. And that's why I'm doing this.
John, if I were living where I used to live in Long Island and you were to win in this fall, you would be my elected representative.
Where'd you live?
I live in Huntington.
Oh, great. Yeah, absolutely.
So the border essentially for the congressional districts, the way it shakes out, looks like Huntington basically is sort of where it starts, and then it starts heading eastward.
Huntington to Montauk, basically.
Exactly. So I was looking at that this morning. I laughed. I mean, we enjoy our time. We were there for about 4 years and then moved after we had our firstborn. So I say this.
You live now?
What's that? I'm in Easton, Pennsylvania.
Okay, great.
Yeah, which is funny because I'm now in another highly contested district. In District 7, Susan Wild is currently hoping to hold her seat. So, John, for you though, when you think about that district in District 1 in Suffolk, obviously I have a little bit of exposure having lived there for a few years. But what are the needs of the community that just strike you? Like if you're going to win this election and represent D1 in the great state of New York, what needs the community trying to serve?
Look, I think whenever you talk to folks, I mean, whether it's Northport, Greenport, anywhere here on Long Island, knock on doors. Democrats are really focused on the danger to Donald Trump. That's true. But the number one thing everybody says is the crisis of affordability. This goes back to, this is bigger than just inflation. Right. And increasingly, I think people are getting hip to the fact there might be a little bit of price gouging. Inflation's getting better, but it's not happening fast enough. They're fired up about abortion for sure, and Roe being taken away. And that's motivating a lot of folks. But affordability permeates everything. I mean, the average cost of a house here, as you probably well know, is nearly $700,000. Families have been here for generations feel like their kids can't move here. And that creates, I think, both a crisis and opportunity. I think a lot of the frustration folks feel about democracy isn't just about Donald Trump. It's a sense that the system doesn't feel like it's working for them, particularly if they're in the middle class. Middle class made Long Island, right? I mean, this is, this is fundamental. And it's not an accident to me or coincidence to me that the middle of our politics have been hollowed out at the same time that the middle of our economy has been hollowed out. And so I think you need to look cohesively about that. And there absolutely are things that government can do, and Democrats, frankly, have credibility doing in terms of focusing on rebuilding the middle class. A couple things I think we can do concretely right off the bat to address affordability. And then I can get into housing, because I think housing is having a moment. People are talking about it in a way, in a more elevated, comprehensive way than we have in previous election cycles. But look, Donald Trump and the Republicans raised our taxes by taking away the state and local tax deduction. And what I think really is frustrating is they did it out of spite as part of a political stunt. And they may talk a good game about how they're going to go and try to repeal it, but let's get real. Republicans are never going to restore the state and local tax deduction, because they're really invested in the red state, blue state divide. They like it. They see that as a feature, not a bug. But it's going to expire in 25. And if Democrats take the House, and if we win New York 1, we will take the House. This is an opportunity to restore that. And if you're a family of 4 in Smithtown, right? Let's say your husband's a plumber and the wife's a school teacher and they've got 2 kids, worked with a CPA to run some numbers, that's almost $4,000 back in their pocket. And then if we can expand the child tax credit, which is another real priority, we did it for 1 year during COVID, cut child poverty in half. That almost doubles that. So that's real money in the pockets of working people and working families. And that's the kind of thing we can do to begin to restore faith. Housing is trickier, right? But you have first-time home buyer loans. It's one thing we can do. We can ease the regulation around what's called ADUs, accessory dwelling units, so that basically families can stay together. Grandma and grandpa can live in a smaller unit in the back and it can be an intergenerational family, or you can rent it out for temporary workers. We need to improve transportation. That's a perennial problem here on Long Island. But these are basic concrete things we can do, and it's in all of our interest. We need to rebuild the middle class, which is getting squeezed and frankly screwed over for decades. And that's led a lot to the frustration that's, I think, been hijacked by folks on the right who redirect that frustration towards culture war grievance politics, rather than looking at what we can actually do to make the American economy and the American family work again.
Yeah. Very well said there, John. We can see why you're running for Congress. As somebody who used to be in the Smithtown Hop Hog area, I worked for HBO out there for years, for over a decade. So
is that right? I didn't know that about you.
That's right. I worked at HBO for programming and planning, and helped build the HBO Go, now Max experience. That's for another pod for another time, John. But I want to zoom out.
Watching the Western.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I did not program it at the time, but you acquire a company, and then all of a sudden, boom, you get more content. So I do want to get on Nick focused on the constituents of Suffolk County. Let's zoom out a little bit more, because obviously we're going to focus a little bit towards the end here on the June 25th date that's coming up with the primary. But let's say you were to win and you get to the general in November, you win. Zoom out for us here with respect to House Democrats right now, Senate Democrats, the Democratic platform. You just touched on it a little bit about the messaging to people right now. Biden's in a huge re-election campaign cycle. You were talking about this on TV with the victories legislatively, but maybe Democrats are not communicating it properly. What do you think you would bring to the Democratic Party from that standpoint, in being a messenger for them to talk about some of the things that they've been able to pass?
I think this is a fundamental issue. It's funny. I got in the race on February 21st, and that night I spoke at a Huntington Town Democratic Committee meeting, and Jay Jacobs, the chairman of the state party who's endorsed me, came to the meeting and was taking questions. And I was really impressed. He began the meeting by a moment of silence for Alexei Navalny, and then took questions for around 40 minits from Democratic Town Committee members. And one thing that they said that I've heard over and over again is a real frustration on the part of Democrats about our inability to message clearly, right? Democrats are always on defense, right? They're always responding to things. They're not on offense. I think one of the things we learned from Tom Suozzi's special election win is not only that candidate quality matters, but also that messaging matters, and leaning into issues that people actually care about, right? And I think too often Democrats sort of tiptoe around and they seem afraid of offending someone or something, and they don't speak clearly about the issues that people are concerned about. So we got to play offense, need to communicate clearly. And if there's not moral clarity and moral urgency around this election, then you don't have a pulse. I mean, let's not forget the larger stakes here, right? It's not just democracy versus autocracy at home and abroad, though that is the stakes. I mean, we saw it in the Supreme Court hearing last week. I mean, we have a president, we've never in our history. I'm a historian, as you say, and I appreciate your co-host's books in the background. I've got a good Grant biography, the new MLK. I think I may even see Doris Kearns Goodwin's on leadership back there. This is one of those times where citizens have to step up. We have never in our history, we've been divided before. Late 60s, the 1860s, God knows, my last book was on Lincoln. We've been through worse times before. We'll get through this, but we have never had a major party nominee campaign on an authoritarian platform, praising dictators at every step, and now asking the Supreme Court to grant blanket immunity that could involve assassination of political enemies, according to his own lawyer, while citing the Washington's farewell address, which I did write a book about. And that's a complete intentional misreading and gaslighting of the American people to try to cite that as a justification. This is a dangerous moment in our history, and I think people are hip to that. And so I think there's urgency to communicate the successes that have been in place. Some of the economic gains are just being felt, but this is no joke, and people got to wake up and not get lulled into a sense of moral equivalence or, oh, everybody's bad. I mean, this ain't a time for that. It's all in line. We got one big tent political party left in America that believes in bipartisanship, and that record shows it. The infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, on and on. Big bipartisan laws that were passed under Biden. 300 bipartisan bills passed between when Pelosi was Speaker. And so that's a legacy of success. We got to communicate it clearly and play offense and just explain to people just very clearly the great danger we are in as a country. This is going to be trajectory defined, right? I mean, there's a reason Vladimir Putin's sort of waiting to see what happens in the election before he makes a decision about Ukraine. I mean, democracies at home and abroad are hanging in the balance here. Don't get lulled into, don't get all fashionably pessimistic or cynical or thinking that somehow, that your vote doesn't count, or maybe everyone's rigged and everyone's, keep your eye on the ball. Keep focused on the big picture. We're going to be judged by history in this. We're going to be judged what we do. This is on our watch.
John, as you're now running for office, obviously, what's the learning curve been like to become an elected official? You're obviously coming from a world of media, an author. Now you step into a different universe, and you're sort of learning in real time and getting ready for some major events coming up.
Yeah, I got to say, I have found it to be really invigorating. It's sort of true in life. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. And obviously, this is a very serious thing to do. It's not the easy path, but it feels like the right one. And I've learned so much. I mean, I've covered politics for cycle upon cycle as an editor-in-chief, as an anchor, as an analyst, as a columnist. And so being the candidates is fascinatingly different. And it's a worthwhile perspective. And I think, honestly, look, democracy, democratic republics depend on people stepping up and doing this for a season of their life, right? I think it's a great experience for everyone. I love meeting folks and talking to them about their concerns and their priorities and what you learn and how, frankly, it's different than a lot of the lenses we use on the news. I think I've always believed we need to focus more on solutions, not just talking about problems. But the consultant class has its own sort of gravitational bias towards cookie cutter approaches, and I don't think that's what folks are looking for. I think we got to disrupt the system in terms of just people's frustration with the division and the dysfunction, and the ability to call out extremes wherever they may be. I mean, to me, it's just defend liberal values against illiberalism, and to have a heart and to use a head and to give people a sense of hope. That we live in a country where we're ultimately responsible. We can improve things. It's not easy, but that's why we should talk about policies. People say, "Oh, don't talk about policies." People's eyes will glaze over. Well, I think that's how you talk about policies, because you got to give people hope that things can get better. There are things we can do. We're not powerless. That's the whole point of a democracy, right? That's a whole that can be a whole nother term for democracy. It's the we are not powerless form of government. We can make changes. But we need to build broad coalitions to do it. And I think that's one of the exciting things about this time. This is a time where we can build the broadest possible coalitions to defend democracy and defeat Donald Trump. And then when the fever breaks, to build a new kind of politics. Because most people understand that, bipartisanship is how you get things done. It's just folks on the far right and who seem to think that bipartisanship's the problem. We know it's the solution. So this is one of those moments. And I'm really, for me, there feels total continuity between the work I was doing as a columnist, as a journalist, as an anchor and analyst, a historian, and this. This is just a new arena, but it feels good.
Quick break from the pod. As always, we are presented by our friends over at SeatGeek. If you need tickets to the biggest concerts, shows, sporting events, MLB season that's starting up this coming week, you got the NBA and NHL playoffs coming up soon. SeatGeek has got you covered. Nick, did you download the SeatGeek app like I told you?
Did. we're excited to use it because we've got obviously the Phillies starting up this season. So I'm excited to take my girls out there and just take full advantage of the perks we get as partners.
That's right, as you should, as should our audience right now. So if you're watching or listening to this, when you download the app, you put the tickets in the cart. When you hit the checkout, there's going to be a little promo code field right there. Do me a favor, enter in the promo code, "Can we please talk?" All one word. You're going to get $20 off that purchase. Download the SeatGeek app or go to SeatGeek.com to get your tickets today. Well, let's get into some key dates here, John, because let's get into the arena. You got June 25th, a Tuesday coming up with the primaries happening out there. So if you're a registered voter out in Long Island, a registered Democrat, you want to go vote for John out there. So John, what's the plan over these next 2 months right now? As we're recording this, it's the end of April right now. What's your plan on the ground here for the next, 8 weeks or so for voters out there? And then on the flip side, let me be pessimistic for a second here, my friend. What happens if you don't win? Because you just gave me the pump up speech of it's too important to not sit this out, right? And you're doing and by the way, kudos to you for running for Congress and doing that and leaving the television world. I could not do it myself. I feel a little unintelligent listening to you talk. So I'm glad you're doing it and not me, my friend. But listen, what happens if we don't win in the June 25th primary? What's the next step for John Avlon?
Well, first of all, I believe we'll win. And one of my favorite apocryphal Abraham Lincoln quotes is, "I'm an optimist because I don't see the point in being anything else." But we got data to prove it. I mean, nothing's a done deal, and you should always run like you're behind. But in the first 40 days of this campaign, end of the first quarter, we raised $1.1 million. I think that's a measure of the enthusiasm and support. My launch video got 2.6 million views in 3 days. I think that's a measure of enthusiasm and support. We've gotten the support of 5 out of 8 town Democratic committees in the district. They never endorse in primaries. They have this time. My opponent has gotten done. We've gotten elected officials from the assembly to the county legislature. And so we've got a lot of support. We got to keep people fired up. We got to keep them motivated, thinking about this is, there's been a low level sense that, without getting too local politics, that, Long Island was going Republican, right? Because we had a bad cycle. I think if you understand what's been actually happening here on the ground, if you've been following politics locally, that's not inevitable. There are a couple of bad cycles, and don't over-index that. This district was held by Democrat Tim Bishop for 12 years before Lee Zeldin held it for 8. Now you got a first-term Republican who's a Trump hugger, who's the first of the 18. There are 18 Republicans who represent a district Biden won. He's the first to endorse Donald Trump and did it full-throated and early. He mocked the bipartisan border security bill. He cheered when Roe v. Wade was overturned. He thinks we should lower the age to buy AR-15s. He's far too far right for the district. He also doesn't live in the district. He lives in Amityville. He can't even vote for himself. His congressman is a neighboring Congressman, Andrew Garbarino, and he's never even held an in-person town hall as a member of Congress. So this is a fight I can't wait to have. This is the good fight, and I believe in being a happy warrior.
To that end, John, I appreciate you reminding us all where Amityville is, of course. When you think about, though, I think something that many of us have observed with members of Congress is that, there's a push to develop a national presence, through social media, having an opinion on national issues that sometimes, whether your district is in line with that or not, may not necessarily be what drives a push for a form of branding. How do you envision working with people that potentially, for the sake of television, may give off a certain persona, but in terms of just day-to-day work as members of Congress, put forward a totally different vibe?
Well, look, first of all, I believe democracy depends on reasoning together, right? And you don't have to agree on everything. Right? That's part of the idea of democracy itself. But we do have to agree on common facts. And that's what's so sinister about this particular era we're in, right? Because the idea of common facts has itself been assaulted, not just undermined, but outright assaulted, right? I mean, the fact that Trump is using an election lie as a litmus test for party loyalty and people who know better are falling for it, that's sinister. So don't think this is politics as usual. It's not. And as a former journalist, I also think that people are responsible for what they say when they have the microphone. We all know people in media who say outrageous, polarizing things, right? They polarize for profit. And then they get off the mic and they say, well, it's great for ratings. I don't really believe it. Maybe they praise Trump and then they diss him when they don't have the microphone. But they're misleading people. I think that is a total just dereliction of duty. And that's just people on who've got the microphone in media. So the bar should be even higher for people in Congress. I know we've gotten used to kind of making it lower. But that said, I absolutely understand you've got to work with reasonable Republicans. Politics should be about winning over the reasonable edge of the opposition. That's what's so great about a swing district. You know, they're less than 20% of congressional seats are swings. And I think those have the most exciting elections and the most representative outcomes. And I think will be responsive to the kind of politics we all say we want. And there are good Republicans and people of good faith. Many of them have been chased out of the Republican Party. I'm married to a Republican, not a Trumper, but a Republican. And so I think that's actually something to lean into, that we're not as divided as the extremes would suggest. To some extent, I think the Trumpists on the far right have given us a psychological lesson in what happens when a small number of people are very loud and they succeed in a polarized political environment, in particular, in intimidating people, either into falling in line or falling into silence. And what do then? They hunt for heretics. They say, if anyone doesn't toe the party line, we chase them out of the party. God knows we've seen that. But that's where the opportunity for a broader coalition comes in. But yes, you work with people on the issues you can find agreement on. But right now we're having some people, there's disagreements about basic facts. There's disagreements about democracy. There's disagreements about whether we should stand up to authoritarian regimes invading our allies. So you got to take a hard line on that. Then you got to work with the people of good faith who are on different sides of different issues and find areas of common ground and build on. That's why I'm running as a common sense Democrat, right? That means something. You got to work and solve problems, and democracy depends on reasoning together. It has been from the various early days of the Republic. Perfect's not on the menu. We are imperfect people trying to form a more perfect union. It's always been the case.
John, like we like to say here, some things are not R&D, they're right and wrong. And that's a tagline for the show. Before we let you go, John, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you to put on your TV pundit hat for 1 second, because you touched upon it. You touched upon it in the beginning of this when you talked a little bit, you alluded to it a little bit about the Trump immunity case. And I remember you and friend of the show, Ellie Honig, having a back and forth about the 14th Amendment, Section 3. Will the Supreme Court, take Colorado's case and, and what they will do with that? Obviously, they ended up voting in former President Trump's favor on that. So I'm going to give you, unlike a casino, I'm going to give you a chance to double down here, because the immunity case, Nick and I have talked about it in recent episodes. Obviously last week was oral arguments in front of the court. Some wild scenarios that are not plausible or should not be plausible in the Republic, but they were asked, and all of a sudden, you even had Amy Coney Barrett attacking the Trump attorney about, should a president have this type of immunity, whether it's a private act or an official act? What do you make of all this as a historian and now somebody removed from television punditry that used to be asked about this?
We need to wake the hell up. I mean, there's the danger that we get numb to all this. We have a former president's attorney basically saying that a president could be able to assassinate opponents or execute a coup, and that holding them, if we got rid of presidential immunity, that might be polarizing for the country. What would be polarizing? Would be assassinating political opponents and executing a coup. Okay, you want to cite Washington's farewell address? I can go chapter and verse. Washington warned primarily about the dangers of what we would call hyperpartisanship, specifically because he said it would lead some individuals to achieve tyranny on the ruins of public liberty, and it leads occasionally to riots and insurrection. Guess what passages the Trump attorney did not quote? Okay. In the case of the 14th Amendment, Section 3, I come to this as someone who's written a book about Abraham Lincoln. If you're going to be an originalist and a textualist, then the people around the ratification of that debate, it was intended to be prospective, not just retrospective. While I don't think individual states should be able to bar people from the ballot, I think that's a terrible precedent. It is absolutely the case that if a president participates or gives aid or comfort to in a rebellion or insurrection, then they should, if they've taken an oath to uphold a federal office, any federal office, then they should be barred from holding office. Now, the question of how that is executed, we could disagree, and Ellie and I disagree about that. But the fact that we just act like what was written in the Constitution doesn't matter, doesn't apply, is itself a dangerous precedent. But the really dangerous precedent is one we're seeing argued right now about immunity. I mean, if people are little r Republicans, if they are concerned about allegedly executive power, if they care about originalism and textualism, as our conservative friends often do, then they wouldn't understand that the founding fathers debated extensively the dangers of a tyrannical executive. They formed an entire form of government to stop a tyrannical executive. The idea that Sam Alito and other folks were indulging questions that would create the capacity for a tyrannical executive is itself self-evidently insane and deeply dangerous. And don't get lulled into it. And God bless Amy Coney Barrett for calling that out. Let's hope we have a broad decision, because this is not the kind of conversation, particularly as unmoored from history and context as it was, that we should be sleeping on. And yet I think people get numb, they get exhausted, they tune it out. This is the worst possible time to be exhausted. This is the worst possible time to tune it out. That's what Liz Cheney calls sleepwalking to a dictatorship. And that's why I think we need to be wide awake in America right now.
That's the soundbite. That's why the man was on TV for so long. You can go to johnavlon.com and find out all about his run for Congress if you want to donate there. If you live in New York's 1st Congressional District, June 25th is the primary there. So go out there and vote your support for John. John, I can't thank you enough for hopping on the podcast. Continued success to you, my friend. And please stay safe. Hey, thanks for watching the Can We Please Talk podcast. Whatever clip you just watched, we hope you enjoyed it. And we hope you stick around for some more. Subscribe to the channel. My partner's over here smashing the button. Come on, do him a favor. So hit subscribe.